So here we are again for part two. Hi to Anne again. Thank you.
Okay.
We've had a little bit of a break and a little bit of a chat. And one of the things that I spotted, it was really clear, Anne, was that your faith has always been a very practical, very grounded faith. I mean, you know, learning about faith, but also learning about life and how to tie knots, for example, or on basic skills. But you also talked about and some of the being willing to share about some of the difficult things. So in a practical sense, I'm really interested to hear how how your faith has sustained you, and also the church, Jesus, and the church, how the church has been helpful. So it would bless us, I think, if you're able to share some of the difficult times with the good news afterwards.
Yeah, I'll try and get the good news.
Yeah.
I guess the first really big thing was when my mother died. I mean, obviously her death was a pretty significant thing in my life and a great loss. But I was absolutely convinced she'd gone straight to heaven without any need to do anything in between. So it wasn't all bad news. But what was bad was that there was a situation in the family which had, between my husband's family and my family, which had made my mother really unhappy. And so that she died, I don't know at that moment, but she had been extremely happy in her final years. And it made me very angry. And afterwards, I don't know how long it went on for, but I used to walk. When I walked the dog, I'd be saying all the things I wanted to say to the people who'd hurt my mother.
Right, yeah.
But I never ever did say it to them. Not then. After my father died, I did say something, but not then. And I got angrier and angrier. What I didn't understand was that I was getting more and more depressed.
Right, yeah.
Because I didn't really know anything about depression then. But at the point at which I realised that I had been seriously looking at the best way to die, one of the things I was thinking was the way that would cause everybody else the least problems. I mean, not that that's ever the case, is it? But perhaps that wouldn't upset as many people as some ways do. When I actually realised that I was seriously thinking that, I went to my doctor, and my doctor was a Christian, and I knew that. He actually went to the same church as I had, and so I was able to talk to him, and he actually made a massive difference, because you have a 10-minute appointment. I think I was with him a good half hour, that's longer, because he insisted on hearing it all, understanding what was happening. Actually, the treatment I had was drugs, which worked. But I think it partly worked because I had to keep going back and seeing him regularly. I never saw anybody else. I never saw a psychiatrist. It was seeing him and taking his drug for about 6 months. And I came out the other side accepting the situation, at least, and being able to accept the people. I actually came out of it with a stronger faith, well, at least with a stronger knowledge that God was sustaining me. And it was, I think, at that point that the footsteps in the sand story became really important to me, because I hadn't known God was there. I hadn't been aware of him. But afterwards, I realised that he must have been, and he must have been instrumental in me seeing the right doctor at the right time, having the right treatment, and being able to carry on with life afterwards. I became aware of him again, as it were, of his presence. That was the first occasion. And I suppose the second one was when there was a point at which I realised that my husband had been unfaithful to me, actually throughout our marriage, pretty well, because I started finding out things from the past. But he actually told me. When he had only been ordained a couple of years, I suppose, he had an affair with somebody in the church as a result of pastoral work. And as they always, it's always your best friend. It wasn't quite that, but it was somebody that I was friendly with. And we got over that, and we were happy. We had some really happy times in our marriage, and we had 2 beautiful children. So I don't regret it. But we got over that, and we had quite a good period. And then it happened several times again, and it was devastating to know that it was still happening. Eventually, we came to Peterborough, and he left me for somebody else. This was a long period,
right? Yeah.
Of a great deal of pain, and we'd been going to church. The services that he was taking, and he was marrying people, and it was all family. And when we came here, we tried different churches, and actually, I didn't like any of them. I didn't feel comfortable in any of them, and I certainly wouldn't have gone and talked to anybody in any of them. It just so happened that when he left me, he said he would rent a house for me. He'd continue to pay for it. And I ended up in Gunthorpe Road.
Right, yes.
I already knew people and guides, because I arrived in Peterborough from Essex already knowing people, because I'd got this
because of the guiding movement,
regional sense. I knew people. I knew the county commissioner, and I was asked to do a county job, and then I was asked to be district commissioner. So I was district commissioner for the area around Brookside, including Brookside Guidance and Brownies. Just after that. And it was then that I got involved with Brookside first and got to know people. And I found that I was able to talk about what had happened. And before that, there had only been one person who happened to be somebody who used to come to our church for evening worship, but actually was a member of another church. We were in a group, and she was went to another church. And I thought I could go and talk to her, because she was professionally involved in hearing people's problems and keeping secrets. So I thought I was secure to tell her. And that was such a relief to hear to be able to tell somebody what was happening, and to receive love. I was receiving love from lots of people, but to receive love from her when she knew what was happening, when she understood the whole background, and that was tremendous. And I really felt that God gave me that opportunity, and it made a massive amount of difference to me to be able to discuss it with her. But when I was at Brookside, I was actually able in a small group, obviously it was confidential, but I was able to talk about it, and I found that helpful again, in being able to share some of the reality of my life. It's very easy to talk about the things you've done that are successful, isn't it? But it was really important to do that, and I felt quite secure at Brookside as well, and that was important to me, and enabled me to worship again in a much deeper way. and to begin to let my life be healed and move on. The other big thing that has happened to me is my second husband dying. He had a heart attack in the March, and he wasn't expected to live, but did. I can remember when I got to the hospital after I'd been told he had this heart attack, and he was still in resus. So I prayed the whole time. Well, I mean, there were a few people I had to speak to, but apart from that, I just prayed and prayed and prayed. And for him. And when I was allowed to see him the next day, they froze him overnight and then gradually warmed him up, and I was allowed to see him in the middle of the morning. And he was gradually coming round. I just couldn't, I mean, it was such a miracle. And in that time, I'd had support from not just from Christians, but from non-Christians as well, who, who would say they were non-Christian, who were absolutely wonderful, people from work who were so supportive. Because I was on my own, of course, here. He then made a remarkable amount of recovery, but it was discovered that he needed a bypass operation, double bypass operation. We got married in between. With a heart attack in March, we got married in May, the beginning of May. He had his operation at the end of May. He appeared to be doing really well. He was talking about going back to work. We went on holiday in September. We came back, and 3 days later, he was dead. And I found him dead. He just had a second heart attack, and his heart was so badly damaged. We had been warned about that. His heart wouldn't stand him a heart attack. So from that point, I wasn't surprised that he was dead rather than just ill. And then I was back on my own again. And at that point, we'd been going to Malham Church.
Right, yeah.
Because we started off going to Brookside, and Steve said, I'm really not comfortable with the services, because he'd been an Anglican.
Yeah.
He hadn't been going to church for years, but he'd been an Anglican. And so we had a look round, and we tried Malham, and we decided to go there. It's very old-fashioned, and it's a lovely church. It's very old-fashioned, very high, and I wasn't entirely comfortable. And I would have stayed there, possibly, afterwards, except that I think I went a couple of times after he died. Nobody spoke to me.
Right, yeah.
The rector did. He took the funeral, and he was really good. He was very helpful. But no member of the church, apart from the person that handed me a hymn book at the beginning and said good morning, nobody said a word. It was as if I'd been going without a husband or something. Nobody discussed why he wasn't there. See what I mean?
Right, yeah.
Really strange. And because of that, I just stopped going to church at all.
Right.
And I didn't go. I don't know how long it was, to be honest. It might have been a couple of years. I just didn't go.
So a sustained period then.
Yes, it was. And then I happened to meet somebody from Brookside. It was Joanna and Margaret Parker.
Yeah.
In a garden centre. One day I was having a cup of coffee, and so were they. And they said, why don't you come back to Brookside? And I thought, I don't know. It's funny if you sort of stop going somewhere.
Yeah.
But eventually I did, and I was just overwhelmed by the welcome that I got. Yeah. And people say, it's lovely to see you back, and that was a big healing experience. It really was. And again, I felt that God was directing me. to where he wanted me to be. So when Brookside needed a church secretary, Lord,
That's right. Is there anyone in the room?
And ended up being secretary to every committee at Brookside.
Yeah.
At one point. No, except the pastoral committee. But, yeah, everything else I'm the secretary to for a bit. I managed to drop a lot of those. I'm not secretary to anything at the moment.
I mean, it's so encouraging to hear. I just let the story roll on. It's your story, but to hear, I always sort of felt this, that ultimately, you know, when you talk about what church is, you can formalize it and you can talk about the roles you need, the structure you need, and actually there's common sense for that. There's good reason for that. You know, you can't just be you know, people, especially people, it's interesting that your kind of ongoing experience of the Holy Spirit and impacted by the charismatic movement. There's a tendency for people to go, oh, the Spirit will sort it, you know, and the Spirit can bring order out of chaos, but sometimes we have to do our own planning with it, you know, I think. But
we have to live through it. I think that's the thing. We have to live through it.
I mean, it's really encouraging. I do have one final question for you, which you won't be prepared for, but it doesn't matter because but just be interested to hear your response. So you sit there now, you sit, and we're in the middle of lockdown, you're engaged in online. I get the sense that, you know, you still clearly are see yourself as a disciple on the road, part of the church, whatever church is. What do you discern next? Where do you feel the Spirit is leading you?
Do you know, I don't know. and I seem to have been in that situation for a little while, and I thought I had some idea that God was going to show me fairly soon, about a couple of years ago, and it doesn't seem to have happened. And during lockdown, I just feel as though I'm in limbo, really. There may be a very good reason for that. My eyesight is really bad because I've got 2 cataracts that need operating on, and I'm hoping to have them done in about 3 months' time.
Right.
Because I'm going to Wisbech rather than the hospital. And then I haven't been able to drive since October. And I'm able to do less and less. I can't do a lot of craft work because I can't see it anymore.
Right, yeah.
And that's making me feel, I don't know, restless, I suppose. But you know, I'm approaching 80, and one has to slow down a bit. And obviously, I have slowed down a bit. You can't help it, can you? I mean, age does that to you. Maybe I have no idea what comes next, if anything. I mean, there have been periods in my life when I've used gifts like listening. There was a period when it seemed to me that every time I went to a meeting, I took somebody home and heard the most appalling things about their lives, abuse of all sorts, child abuse and physical abuse as adults. And I thought at the time, yeah, what is it about me? But looking back, I thought, what a wonderful gift that was to enable people to talk about things they haven't talked about in their lives at all. I wasn't giving them advice, but it was enabling them to see where they went next. There have been times when I made and taught people to make banners for a long time. And that was really important. Teaching, enabling people to express things they wanted to say, either to other church people or outside. And that was really important and really special. Then recently there was this business of using my administrative skills, which I'd learned over a working life, to you know, to do quite a lot in preschool, for instance, to get the contracts reviewed and renewed and a whole lot of stuff that needed doing, and there hadn't been anybody to do. And then it comes to an end. I think that's probably come to an end. I think that it's time somebody else took over. But I have no idea what's next, if anything.
It's amazing. I'm sure it will come. I think the trouble is that you have to watch out, don't you? Because it's quite easy to other people to volunteer you for stuff, but whether that's what you're called to in a moment is different. But what I would say is,
good at volunteering myself. Very good at volunteering.
yeah. What I would say is that my experience of you, and actually this is really important in the life of the church, is that you're dependable. And that means that if you do volunteer for something, or if someone approaches you, say, can you do X, it will happen. Now that's actually, oddly enough,
well, I know how important
that is really important.
Yes.
And so those, those are really important people. I think also to acknowledge, and in some of the simple things, like when you're convening online for the Pioneer Hub, although that's a relatively simple thing, can you set up the Zoom meeting, keep track on it?
Yeah.
That's a major thing for us, because it's one less thing for us to think about.
Yes. Well,
to know that somebody else will convene, that releases us, to be able to do other things. I think that's significant. And I think this is it, you see, your involvement in online, I think, although it's not a formalized role, there's no formalized role of, well, it's interesting because I do think there is something about recognizing who's part of the community online. There is a defined community of people who regularly attend for prayers or whatever. But I think the meaningful, the meaningful kind of prayers and comments online make a huge difference, because they set the tone for what the whole group does. And that's, I think, that is a sort of eldership type thing. I'm just so touched and encouraged by what you've been able to share, and I think maybe I'm hoping it's also helpful that it's helped you see, because when we look back, we reflect again, but just what of an impact and encouragement that you have been to others in the life of the church, and how you continue to do that. And we just discern, I think that there are jobs to shed, but there's God is still continuing to use you in a big way.
Yes, I hope he will. It's very difficult to see yourself as an example or anything like that. And one of the things that I just noticed is that I haven't really talked about Jesus very much in this, but actually it's incredibly important to me, and I really do think of him as my best friend. But I don't know. I'm not accustomed to sprinkling. I don't quite. I know. I can't quite think what I'm how to express it. But I learned not to thrust my Christianity down people's throats when I was working.
Right, it's an interesting one.
Because it made them back off. And so I do talk about my faith if I'm asked. I talk about Jesus if I'm asked, but I tend not to I wouldn't go up to a stranger.
Yeah,
it's just not me, and sometimes I feel that's a fault in me, that I ought to be able to.
I think when the time comes and it's right, and somebody asks the direct question about giving their life to, I think. But what I would say is that Jesus is implicit in everything you've said, because we've taken that, as read. And so for those who are searching, will know that we mentioned the Spirit, didn't we?
Yeah.
It's like how Trinitarian, we mentioned God, but I think we just take it as implicit that that Jesus is there, and clearly you have a personal, because you talk about how personally you've been uplifted through very, this is not a remote God that we're talking about here.
Oh no.
So definitely there. So don't feel the need to worry about that. But thank you for everything you've shared. Thank you for your encouragement. I'm sure folks will be encouraged by this. And especially, I think those in the guiding movement will be encouraged as well. Whole new audience there that we may well find.